president to resign. Egypt has reached deadlock. Tahrir Square has become a tent city, a permanent vigil for the anti-government protesters.
They're every single night they're sleeping under the wheels of tanks and armoured personnel carriers, determined not to be squeezed in, as they put it, with this protest.
The mood by that morning had begun to shift a little bit in the sense that shops were opening, stores were opening, very basic stuff, but enough to get enough commercial activity going where people themselves were beginning to question whether or not this prolonged standoff was serving the interests of the country or whether or not it was being somewhat detrimental to the economic activity of daily life.
A fading momentum and Mubarak's promises of reform have threatened to derail the anti-government movement.
Well, by the time we had entered the third week, we could clearly see that there was no progress being made in terms of the talks. I mean, President Mubarak was adamant on trying to engage the protesters through political means. He was trying to appease them with what was described as half-hearted measures. And the protesters were very much defiant. You know, on more than one occasion, we felt that they were, you know, maybe their support was going to wane, perhaps their morale was going to decrease. But in reality, it never did.
Calls for regime change are in danger of dying out. But anti-government protesters receive a spark of hope from an unknown Egyptian. Google executive and political activist Wael Ghonem is released after his arrest by plainclothes policemen at the start of the protests. As an architect of the dissent that ignited a revolution, his emotional interview injects a sense of purpose into the softening protests.
I want to say to every mother and every father that lost his child, I'm sorry, but this is not our fault. I swear to God, this is not our fault. It is the fault of everyone who is holding on to power greedily and would not let it go. I want to leave.
Wael Ghonem's interview was definitely a game changer in the sense that it gave the protesters a huge public morale boost, and certainly one of great importance at a very critical time.
He spoke in this way that really, pulled on the heartstrings of the protesters and in the Egyptian population in general, which by that point was starting to lose a little bit of that momentum and that really strong feelings that they were having towards the revolution. It humanized the revolution in a way that maybe it hadn't been humanized in the weeks beforehand.
As long as you are standing here, you are a hero. You are the heroes.
As day breaks, the hundreds of Egyptians killed over the last 3 weeks are mourned. Thousands flock to Tahrir Square in the largest protest march against Mubarak yet, proof that they are still a force to be reckoned with. But the government message remains defiant, and Vice President Omar Suleiman delivers an ominous warning. There will be no ending of the regime and no immediate departure for President Hosni Mubarak.
This issue, we come around again to the issue of trust. And I have to say that you won't find many people or anyone who will trust assurances from this regime, whether it comes from Suleiman or anyone within the regime. Of course, everyone knows that the resounding message coming out of that massive demonstration is that Hosni Mubarak must step down.
Many of the protesters joined the demonstrations in Tahrir Square for the first time. Protests overflow onto bridges over the Nile and into squares in central Cairo.
A new kind of people who have joined these protests civil servants, teachers, people who maybe wouldn't have come here. Today's a day where they feel that their message is actually being heard in a wider circle than they originally thought.
A number of parallel demonstrations are reported across the country. Ismailia, Asyut, El Mahala El Kubra, and Alexandria.
There are tens of thousands of people still gathered here in Alexandria as we enter the third week of these anti-government protests. Alexandria obviously has been a flashpoint several times throughout these unprecedented unfolding scenarios in Egypt.
In Cairo, the military maintains a presence around Tahrir Square as protesters take policing into their own hands.
Protesters themselves have allocated certain people who check those who go inside and check their ID cards. But because there are just so many people, like thousands of people, as I was trying to come here, going the other way into Liberation Square, it's proving pretty difficult. But so far, there's still a very positive atmosphere, even given these long queues, people going around the corner, around the bridge, into the streets, waiting to get inside. No one seems upset about it. No one seems angry. They're very, very orderly, and as I said, a very positive atmosphere inside that square right now. The other very significant development were the strikes that were taking place. What we were seeing on that day when we were driving around Cairo were not just the independent unions that were on strike calling for all of the workers to be on strike, but also state-owned companies, the petroleum company, the electric company, the telecommunications company, hundreds of people who were outside refusing to go to work, saying that they want better salaries, better pay, better welfare. You know, they've had these demands for years and years. But now, given the fact that the police weren't going to stop them if they did protest, now was the time. Now was the opportunity for them to voice them. And it was like this pressure had been lifted from Egyptian society, and all parts of the society were coming out now.
With the momentum on their side, protesters in Tahrir Square begin to sense that they need to make their move.
There was definitely a feeling by Wednesday that the protesters needed to step it up. They needed to move outside of the square, and that is what we kept being told by those inside. They were saying that we have been here now for 2 weeks, our demands are not getting met, and now it's time to widen this out.
On Thursday morning, the rumor started to fly that perhaps he wanted to avoid a public embarrassment on Friday.
There were indications that a speech may be made, and then we started hearing from people within the international community, and then we were hearing from members of the National Democratic Party that perhaps he would go. And as the hours went by, it started becoming clearer and clearer that something momentous was going to happen, and that the statement would in fact lead to Mubarak's departure.
They've closed the parliament. Workers have been told to go home. Soldiers have entered to protect it. The first time the army has been on parliamentary ground in Egypt.
After nightfall,